It's David Ducker coming back at you, and today we're going to be talking about problem GMs. Today we're talking about the no prepper, the man who has put zero work into his world, his setting, his story. He showed up and said, I'll run impromptu, the impromptu GM. Impromptu can be fine for one-shots. For a limited time period, it's not difficult, especially when it's action-oriented, to run off the top of your head. No problem at all. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about campaigns. We're talking about people who have said, okay, we're going to start a campaign. Everybody make characters. We're going to run for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year, whatever it is. And then you show up, you've made your character, hopefully you've written a backstory to help this man, although he may be helpless, in fact, by his own choosing. So you've done your prep, he has not done his prep. So he starts you off. He might have like an opening scene. He might have a few NPCs. He might have like this main story arc for you to go on. He may not, but usually they'll at least have that much. They'll have a little bit for you to work with. The problems start to come when you move out into the world. You need to role play, so you need to know what's going on around you. And your character will have knowledge of the world. And when the GM doesn't have knowledge of the world, but your character does, that causes a lot of problems. So, for example, I was playing a well-educated character. He was an aristocrat. He was highly religious. He could read in a medieval setting. He was a very smart guy. And this was a traveling campaign. It was a short campaign too, but that's because of some of the problems we had with our GM. So we hit town. I say, okay, what does a town look like? He says, well, there's buildings, and there are people. And I'm just like, I'm like, okay, what do the buildings look like? What are they made of? How tall are they? Is there a town wall? The people, how are they dressed? Do they look healthy? Do they look sickly? Are the people here like big, brawny, mean-looking guys, or is everybody short and skinny and bookish? And he's got the deer in the headlights. And I know he hasn't got this city prepped at all. He knows there's a city and there's people in it, and that's what he told us. But I need to know all of these other details because I need to get political scheming going on against all of the power players in this town. And of course, if he hasn't prepped the town, you better believe he hasn't prepped any power players. So, I'm going down into the city. I'm asking, okay, well, what do I know? I have knowledge history. What's the history of this city? Okay, I have knowledge economics. What's their exports and imports? I have knowledge military. What's their military strength like? What's their fighting style in this region? I have knowledge heraldry and nobility. Who are the nobles? Who can I play off against each other? Do any of them have eligible daughters? Because my character is looking to get married at some point. Politically, he doesn't really care about romance, but he needs to get in with the aristocracy. So I've got all of these things I need to know. And the GM has none of it prepped. So that's a problem. It's a problem because when you prep on the fly, when you're creating your world spontaneously, it doesn't always mesh together perfectly. Like if you say, oh, they have a very, very powerful military, they love killing things, and they're brutal and dominant. But then if you are not really careful, you might accidentally contradict yourself. We might run into like a temple of a pacifist god. It's like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense in this highly militant city. Or we might be looking at the map of the city and say, well, this city's not really tactically very well put together or defended. That doesn't make a lot of sense for a very militant culture. And, things start fraying and falling apart. You could say, oh, and their government they're a republic. I'm like, well, Republics can be militant at times, but it doesn't always lend itself to militancy. When everyone has to fight, uh, usually, and they get a vote. It's like I got to fight whether I got to vote as to whether I fight or not. I'm gonna vote not to fight. Most people are gonna vote not to fight unless it's really, really important or their culture is like so ingrained in the military that they volunteer to fight. But most people aren't going to do that, uh, and this also makes you a little bit more moral because you're not going to just go and have an unjust war, a war necessarily of aggression, a war where you're putting your people's lives at stake so the wealthy can get rich. That shouldn't happen as much in a democracy, in a republic, as it does in a kleptocracy or in a despot driven state where the aristocrats are saying, yes, go die for me. That doesn't happen a lot in a democracy, or it shouldn't. So the world building will be subpar when you're doing it on the fly. That's a problem. Um, it takes a huge amount of energy, mental energy, to make up all of this stuff on the fly as well. When you're going through and you're like, okay, I got to come up with a new idea, a new idea, a new idea. Each idea, drains your mana pool just a tiny bit, and you can get exhausted. You can get completely burned out because you haven't prepped. Prepping ahead of time is like, it's like you cast your spell into a scroll. Now you have that scroll to carry with you, so you can use it any time. You don't have to spend mana from that day. You can store your mana up, use it at another point in time. So that's one of the big advantages of prep. So we've got coherency, we've got GM burnout. Another problem with doing it on the fly can be some GMs are just bad at making decisions. And that'll be a separate video. A lot of these things, all you need is a decision, right? It doesn't really matter if it's a kingdom or a republic or a kleptocracy or a meritocracy. We'll explore whatever it is. We'll work with it. But some GMs are just they get deer in the headlights. They don't want to make a decision, and that can really be a killer, especially when you've got to make so many decisions because you haven't done any prep work. So if you prep ahead of time, the world will be better. You'll have more energy. You'll have to do less work in session, and hopefully you can share the world ahead of time with the players, and they'll all be on the same page quicker. Now that's not always going to be the case, and that can cause exposition problems and homework related problems. But basically I'm just outlining that this is a bad GM habit. That's what this series is all about. If you are the GM, if you're running an ongoing game, again, not for one-shots, but an ongoing game, make sure that the culture is detailed enough for you to role play, so that as they come in, you can describe what they see, hear, smell, taste, and the political situation in each region they go to. Not every player will care about this, but all it takes is one player who does care about this to start causing you problems unless you've done that prep, that advance notice. And it might seem and sound daunting, but it's really not. All you have to do is go down the checklist for your culture and make a series of quick decisions, just to allow you to understand the culture a little bit better. Because it's one thing to build the culture on the fly. It's another thing to build the NPCs on the fly. I like to build them all ahead of time, but if there's a definite gradient. If I know the culture, if I know this is our history, our religion, the military, the economy, if I know all of these facets of the culture, so I've got the town prepped, the country, the star sector, whatever it is, if I've got that prepped, it'll be tremendously easy for me to make NPCs up on the fly. Oh, you run into a soldier? You're looking for an army captain? Well, I already know all about the military, So I know what kinds of people will be in this military. I know how it will shape them. I know who it will attract. So it's really easy for me to make all these NPCs up on the fly. You know, a Klingon warrior is this swaggering, braggadocious, honor-bound type character. And I can have variations on that. One is more swaggering, one is more honor-bound, one is more braggadocious. But that's easy because I have the Klingon Empire prepped. If I'm just making like a soldier, I'm like, well, what kind of soldier? I mean, you know, there's so many different kinds of armies, of feudal levies, of you know, buccaneer pirate crews. In some regions, that could be considered the local army, perhaps. So prep the setting ahead of time, even if you haven't prepped the NPCs. And I would recommend you do prep NPCs and you have your political web. But even if you can't do that, you don't do that, make sure you know the setting, because that's really your foundation. And the NPCs are like your next layer up, and you can layer up from there. But the foundation is like the most important one. You really, really need to know the setting, just the mindset of the people, the history, the weather, the geography, and a lot of it's built on weather and geography. You know, your weather and your geography will shape what you have economically, what your military constraints are, your quality of life, and those things can all affect your government and religion. But that's all, you know, world building 101. I've done a lot of videos on that too. But I just wanted to share, you know, the problem GM style, the on-the-fly GM, the man who's done no prep, some of the problems it can bring about, both for the players and the GM. A lot of GMs are sabotaging themselves. If you're burned out, it might be your fault. I hope it's not. In fact, I hope you don't get burned out at all, and see my video on GM burnout to avoid it. But make sure you're preparing for success, not preparing for failure. And let me know in the comments below, when have you seen a GM that is under prepped, that is doing things on the fly? When has it hurt the game? When has it perhaps been a good thing? Maybe you've seen it work well. And do you have tips for making it work well? Leave those in the comments below. And until I see you again, good day and good gaming.